just what is the relationship then between psychiatry, psychiatric training, and science?
There's not no relationship. We're learning more all the time. I really don't want people to discount phenomenology. Phenomenology is recognizable, indisputable patterns of behavior that repeat themselves across individuals, temperaments, time periods, cultures. You look at any culture, across the world now, and you can find something resembling schizophrenia, right? People who hear voices, who see things that other people don't see, who have thoughts that other people find inconsistent with reality. Now, in different cultures across times, people have interpreted that very differently. In some cultures, those are shamans. But at the end of the day, in most cultures, and by the way, schizophrenia is pretty rare. It's like 1% of the population. And that's pretty stable across different cultures. But it's a real thing, right? It's not a made up thing. Same thing with addiction, right? I mean, when we take the extreme of addiction, people who will consume alcohol until they die, despite wanting to stop and despite even acknowledging and seeing the harm and wanting to stop and not being, we can all agree that that's a form of psychopathology. That's real, right? We can hang our hat on that. We have a deep empathy. That's a concern. Family members, society more broadly. We need to help this person. What's going on? So it begins with the phenomenology. That's the right place where it should begin. And we're only just now beginning to try to understand, well, what is actually happening in the brain? What can we actually do about it? So again, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is a big movement now to kind of get rid of the DSM and focus just on specific symptomatology and trying to tie that to, what we know about the brain and the brain works. And that's probably a good thing. Ultimately, these paradigms all need to be wiped out in favor of new, better paradigms. But we don't need to throw the whole thing out. And also, let me just say, going back to the room of 10 psychiatrists and 10 different diagnoses for a single patient, there is that much disagreement when we have unusual or borderline cases or complex mixed cases, or we have a paradigm that's not working. My claim being that for many people with disordered eating, the eating disorder diagnostic paradigm is not as helpful as we would hope. And so we're shifting to this lens of food addiction, which we're feeling like can be more helpful for some patients, right? But for like really classic types of psychopathology, a patient that, you put him in a room with 10 psychiatrists, and that's 10 psychiatrists might really all agree on the diagnosis. So it's just sort of acknowledging and staying humble in the face of how much we still don't understand.
Speaking of the the phenomenology of schizophrenia, my mom, as you know, is a psychiatrist in Chicago. She works with largely, I think, homeless populations, or if not homeless populations, people with very little funds. And this is the thing you do as a psychiatrist child, is when you're roaming the streets, you point at people and you ask your mother what sort of illness they have. And when I was at Columbia, I was riding the subway with my mom, and there are lots of characters on the subway, and I wouldn't literally point at people, but I would ask what disorders she thought people have. And I noticed a trend where if people were wearing lots and lots of clothing in the summer, she could identify them as likely schizophrenics, because apparently schizophrenics are dissociated from their bodies in a way that we are not, and they may experience pain or temperature very differently than we do. And she told me this story about how, I think it was in the 1980s, there was a major heat wave in Chicago, and they went around to the homeless encampments and were handing out pairs of shorts, telling them, okay, wear these shorts, it's going to be 100 plus degrees. And at the end of this heat wave, a number of my mom's patients were found dead with wearing like 10 layers of clothing with the shorts on top of them.
Right, yeah.
And it's just kind of mind-blowing. But my point just being beyond the obvious interest of that story is that, yeah, there's clearly a phenomenology that is
Yeah,
continuous across
yeah.
populations.
And yet, no disrespect to your mom. She was probably, trying to, respond to your curiosity, which is great. But one of the things that I try hard not to do is I try hard not to diagnose anybody who's not actually my patient. Again, this gets a little bit into the whole mind reading thing. Plus, when you don't know the broader circumstances of somebody's life, it's just really hard to know what their deal is, right? No matter
Hmm.
their appearance.
Yeah.
Having said that, yes, I mean, I remember in my training there were certain telltale signs. If somebody's often if they were wearing headphones and a hat, it was sort of thought, are they trying to tune out auditory hallucinations? Or if they're going to be responding to internal stimuli, if they have headphones on, it looks less odd. Now it's, in the olden days before the internet and AirPods, walking down the street, it was easier to tell who was responding to internal voices. Now you can't really differentiate because people are talking to other people, all the time, other people who are not actually there through the internet.
Hmm. I think this difference between you and my mom points to a spectrum in psychiatric practices that
Yes.
non-psychiatrists probably are not aware of. At one end, you have my therapist, who's a psychoanalyst, who's in his 80s, and at the beginning of his training, the psychoanalyst didn't even speak. You might hear a few words from the psychoanalyst every week. They were just listening to you talk. And he never consults the DSMV. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, you have my mom, who does no talk therapy whatsoever. She just does medication management. And I can see that if you only have a few minutes with a patient or you're doing rounds in a hospital, you
Sure.
have to make snap judgments about, especially when insurance doesn't want to pay for lengthy visits with these people, about what sort of illness they have. But in my mom's defense, I don't think that she was diagnosing them. She was responding to my nagging
Yes.
and just giving a
Yeah,
ballpark estimate.
totally.
Mhm.
Yes, yeah. And it is true that, that gestalt of somebody, just their appearance, how they walk, how they move. Yes, all of us do that all the time, and we do it with lightning speed. And in psychiatry, we do that too, but then we have to second guess those things as well. It's sort of like we really have to look under the hood and look deeper. At least I think so. We have that initial reaction, oh, this person, this is, what's going on. But then we have to not assume that we have it right, and we have to